My name is Roscoe and I am 30 years old. If someone had told me a month ago that I would meet the person who would change my life on a cruise ship, I would have scoffed. But life is so amazing. It always catches you by surprise when you least expect it. I stood on the deck of the cruise ship that day and watched the harbor fade away. To be honest, I didn't even want to go on this damn cruise. If it wasn't for my best friend Jack who dragged me here, I would still be in the office working overtime to numb myself with work. Yes, I just fell out of love with Kelly, the girl I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with, and after 2 years of dating, she told me she was in love with someone else. How does that feel? It's like someone stabbed you in the heart and kept stirring. I was thinking about going to the bar for a drink when I heard a voice from behind me. Hey, you're blocking my sunlight. I looked back and saw a girl smiling at me. God, that smile was brighter than the sun. She was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans. Her curly brown hair was tied back in a casual ponytail, and she had a few freckles on her face. For some reason, I suddenly felt a dryness in my throat.
Ooh, sorry.
I grunted, moving to the side. Just kidding. She walked over to me and held out her hand. I'm Elodie. Roscoe. I take her hand, feeling a little surreal. So we talked. Elodie was a journalist and I was a software engineer. We both liked the Beatles. Elodie wanted to travel the world and I wanted to start my own company. Time passed without us realizing it. The sun was setting and the sea was covered with a golden glow. Hey, are you hungry? Elodie asked suddenly. I hear the buffet on the ship is good. I nodded and followed her to the restaurant. Strangely enough, I felt relaxed and at ease with Elodie, nothing like my usual introverted self. We chatted so animatedly as we ate that we only realized that 3 hours had passed when the waiter came to remind us that the restaurant was closing. The days that followed were like a dream. We watched sunrises and sunsets together, attended events together, and walked and talked on the deck together. One night at the dance, I worked up the courage to ask Elodie to dance. She readily agreed, and we twirled around the dance floor as if we had known each other for a long time. At that moment, I felt like we were the only two people left in the world. However, good times are always short-lived. On the day the cruise ship docked, we exchanged contact information reluctantly. Looking at Elodie's back as she walked away, I suddenly realized that I might have fallen in love with her. Hey, Roscoe, shouted Elodie, suddenly turning around. Don't forget to send me a message. I smiled and nodded, silently vowing to keep in touch. After returning to real life, we started a difficult long-distance relationship. Daily video calls became my most anticipated moments. We sent each other small gifts and shared the little things in our lives. Despite being thousands of miles apart, I felt that our hearts had never been so close. 3 months later, I made up my mind and bought a plane ticket to Elodie's city. And just like that, the gears of fate began to turn. My story, and Elodie's, was just beginning. The moment I stepped out of the airport, I knew life would never be the same again. Elodie was standing there, wearing my favorite blue dress and holding a little "Welcome Roscoe" sign. The moment I saw her, I felt my heart stop. Hey, stranger, she said teasingly, her eyes glistening with tears. I put down my luggage and took her in my arms. At that moment, I felt like all the noise in the world had disappeared, leaving only the sound of our two heartbeats. I missed you, I whispered in her ear. Me too. She hugged me back tightly. The days that followed were like a dream. We strolled hand in hand through the city streets. Elodie took me to her favorite cafe. We had a picnic in the park and watched the sunset. Every moment was so beautiful that I began to fear it would all suddenly disappear. A month later, on the first anniversary of our meeting, I mustered up the courage to ask Elodie to marry me. I chose the same park where we had our first date, and under the moonlight, I got down on one knee and pulled out the diamond ring I had carefully chosen. Elodie, I take a deep breath. Meeting you was the best accident of my life. You made me believe in love and that there are endless possibilities in life. I want to face every day ahead with you, whether it's laughter or tears. Will you marry me? Elodie covered her mouth as tears welled up in her eyes. Jesus, Roscoe, she choked out. Yes, yes, I do. I stood up excitedly and put the ring on her finger, then hugged her tightly. A crowd had gathered around us at some point, and they were all clapping and cheering for us. At that moment, I felt like the happiest person in the world. The wedding was on schedule. I felt my eyes moisten as Elodie walked slowly towards me in her white wedding dress, accompanied by her father. She was so beautiful, incredibly beautiful. I do. We smiled at each other and exchanged rings and vows. However, just at this happy moment, I noticed a complex expression flashing across Elodie's parents' faces. I didn't think much of it at the time, just assuming it was because they couldn't bear to part with their daughter. In retrospect, it was probably a warning sign I should have noticed. Life as a newlywed is sweet and wonderful. We moved into a small, cozy new home, cooked together every night, and shared our lives with each other. Elodie continued her work as a journalist, and I rose through the ranks of my company. Everything seemed perfect. Until that night, when Elodie's college buddy Marcus comes over for a visit. "This is Marcus," Elodie introduced, "a good friend of ours from college who now works for an investment firm." Marcus seemed easygoing, and we had a good conversation. But during dinner, I noticed that his eyes always fell unobtrusively on Elodie, who seemed a little uncomfortable as well. That night, Elodie's cell phone rang. She glanced at it, hurriedly said, "Work stuff," and went out to answer the phone. I vaguely heard her lower her voice and say, "No, it's too dangerous." At that time, I was naive enough to think that it was just some little secret at work. Little did I know that this night was the end of our quiet life and the beginning of all the trouble. If I could turn back time, I would tell myself then, trust your instincts. There are things that are far more complicated than you think. But love is sometimes like that, making people lose their minds until reality slaps you in the face. Life is like a speeding train. Sometimes you think you're in control of the direction, but you're actually off track without even realizing it. My married life with Elodie seems to be quiet, but there are dark currents. That day, I was working overtime in my office, preparing for the next day's project presentation. My cell phone suddenly vibrated with a message from Elodie. I casually clicked on it, but froze. It was a message sent to the wrong person. "Honey, see you tonight at 8 p.m. at the usual place. Miss you." I stared at the screen and felt my stomach turn. It was followed by another, "Sorry, sent to the wrong person." It was sent to the girls in the sisterhood. I forced myself to calm down. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding? But what about the honey and the miss you? I decided to pretend I didn't see it and wait to see what Elodie would do next. Over the next few days, I began to watch Elodie's every move. She always seemed distracted and often giggled into her cell phone. A couple of times I asked her who she was talking to, and she was always vague, saying it was something at work. Finally, one day, I couldn't help myself. While Elodie was in the shower, I secretly checked her cell phone. The password was still our anniversary. How ironic. With trembling fingers, I slid the screen until I saw the name, Marcus. I clicked on their conversation and felt the blood in my body freeze. Intimate name calling, ambiguous words, and those photos. My mind went blank and I just felt a heavenly spin. The past came back like a tidal wave. Marcus's frequent visits, Elodie's inexplicable overtime, those mysterious phone calls. Everything made sense. I sat paralyzed on the floor, not knowing whether to cry or laugh. The next few days were like The Walking Dead. I began to secretly follow Elodie, hoping to catch her in the act. Finally, one day, I saw her enter a fancy hotel. I stood outside the door, listening to the sounds of talking and laughing coming from inside. My fists unconsciously clenched. How I wanted to rush in and question them on the spot. But I didn't. I turned away, the anger and pain inside me almost consuming me. When I got home, I sat in the dark, looking over the evidence in my hands. Photos, text messages, call logs. Each one was like a sharp knife, stabbing hard into my heart. I remembered our vows, those sweet times, and tears flowed uncontrollably. The next day, I called in sick and went alone to the bar we always went to. I drank whiskey after whiskey, hoping the alcohol would numb my nerves. The bartender looked at me worriedly and asked if I was in some kind of trouble. I laughed bitterly and shook my head. It's just that I suddenly realized that my life is a joke. When I was half drunk, I called my best friend Jack. He was silent for a long time after listening to me. "Roscoe," he said at last, "are you sure you want to do this? Divorce is no small thing." I had no choice, Jack, I said bitterly. I couldn't trust her anymore. The next day, I contacted an attorney. When I explained my intentions, he looked at me sympathetically and handed me a tissue. It was then that I realized I was in tears again without realizing it. Don't worry, he reassured. We'll protect your rights. And so I began the long process of gathering evidence. Every day was an ordeal, and I had to act as if nothing had happened and continue to live with Elodie. And every late night, I would sit alone in my study and organize the heartbreaking evidence. Sometimes I wonder if everything would have been different if I hadn't boarded that damn cruise ship in the first place, if I hadn't met Elodie. But I know that such assumptions are pointless. Life is like that. You never know what's going to happen next. All I knew was that I had to do something for myself, even if it meant ending a love I once thought would last forever. Life is so ironic. Just when I thought everything was irreparable, fate dealt me another blow. That day, I asked Marcus' fiancée, Emma, to meet me. We met at a quiet cafe, and Emma looked a little puzzled and uneasy. Roscoe, what did you want to see me about? She asked cautiously. I took a deep breath and pushed the prepared folder in front of her. Emma, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but I think you have a right to know the truth. Emma opened the folder in confusion, and then her face turned pale. She shuddered as she flipped through the photos and text message logs, tears streaming down her face uncontrollably. This can't be, she muttered. I sat quietly, giving her time to digest the blow. Suddenly, Emma looked up, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Wait, Roscoe, are you sure any of this is true? She asked, because Marcus has been telling me lately that he's working on a big case and needs to get close to a female reporter named Elodie. I froze. What's the big case? Why approach Elodie? Just as I was puzzled, my cell phone suddenly rang. It was Elodie's sister, Olivia. Roscoe, where are you? I need to see you urgently. Olivia's voice was full of anxiety. I hurriedly said goodbye to Emma and rushed back to the house. Olivia was already waiting for me at the door, her expression terribly serious. Roscoe, I know you've probably figured something out, but things aren't what you think they are. Olivia got right to the point as soon as she walked in the door. I sneered. Not what I thought? So what? Elodie and Marcus were just kidding. Olivia shook her head and took a deep breath. Elodie was on a secret mission. She's an undercover investigative reporter looking into a large crime syndicate behind Marcus. Her close relationship with Marcus is just a disguise. I felt my brain buzz and go blank. What? What do you mean? Olivia continues to explain. Marcus' company is suspected of money laundering and human trafficking. Elodie had to get close to him in order to uncover the truth. She didn't want to keep it from you, but for your safety, she couldn't tell anyone. I dropped onto the couch, feeling like the whole world was spinning out of control. All the anger, the pain, the sense of betrayal suddenly made no sense. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Just then, my cell phone rang again. It was a call from the police department. Is this Mr. Roscoe, please? Your wife, Elodie, was injured in the line of duty and is now in a downtown hospital. Please come over as soon as you can. I felt my heart stop beating. No matter what had happened before, at this moment I had only one thought. Nothing could happen to Elodie. Olivia and I arrived at the hospital in a blaze of glory. Outside the emergency room, I saw a couple of cops and a haggard-looking Marcus. Seeing us, Marcus immediately walked over. I'm sorry, Roscoe, he whispered. I couldn't protect her. I pushed past him and rushed into the emergency room. Elodie lay in the hospital bed, pale, but managed to give me a weak smile. Hey, detective, she said softly, looks like my secret's finally out. I held her hand and tears came to my eyes. All the misunderstandings, suspicions, and anger dissipated in this moment. I only felt deep guilt and fear. I'm sorry, Elodie. I choked out. I should have trusted you. Elodie shook her head. I'm the one who should apologize. I shouldn't have kept this from you. But I really had no choice. Just then, Elodie's parents rushed in. Seeing me, their expressions were a bit complicated. I then realized that they knew about Elodie's secret mission all along. I stood up and bowed deeply. I'm sorry I misunderstood you guys. Elodie's father patted me on the shoulder. It's okay, son. The important thing is that the truth comes out now. Looking at Elodie in her hospital bed and at the people around her who cared for her, I suddenly realized that love is never easy. It requires trust, understanding, and sometimes even courage to face the seemingly impossible truth. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that our story is far from over. The smell of hospital disinfectant is always distracting. I sat by Elodie's bedside, holding her hand and feeling her gradually regaining body heat. The past few days had felt like a nightmare, and all I wanted now was to wake up from it. "Are you okay?" Elodie asked softly, her voice still a little weak. I laughed bitterly. "I should be the one asking you that. I mean," she paused, "about me keeping things from you. Are you still angry?" I took a deep breath and tried to organize my words. "Honestly, I don't know. I understand your position, but being kept in the dark really sucks." Elodie's eyes flashed with guilt. "I know. If I could do it all over again, I would have told you the truth. But at the time, I was really afraid that I would get you involved." Just then, a commotion interrupted our conversation as Marcus passed through the corridor escorted by the police, apparently on his way to be interrogated. Seeing us, he lowered his head, his eyes filled with mixed emotions. I got up and walked to the door and watched as Marcus was taken away. Emma stood at the other end of the corridor with tears streaming down her face. Our eyes met in the air, and we both saw the pain and confusion in each other's eyes. Back in the hospital room, I found Elodie trying to sit up. "Hey, don't move." I rushed over to help her. "Roscoe," she grabbed my hand. "Can we get through this?" I was silent for a moment, then nodded firmly. "We will. But we need time, and we need to rebuild trust." The days after being discharged from the hospital were not easy. Even though the truth had come out, the doubt and pain from those days would not easily dissipate. We decided to undergo marriage counseling in hopes of repairing the rift between us. At our first counseling session, we sat in the psychologist's office in a somewhat awkward atmosphere. "Roscoe, can you talk about how you're feeling right now?" the psychiatrist asked gently. I took a deep breath. I'm confused. On one hand, I'm proud of Elodie, who risked her life for justice. But on the other hand, I can't shake the feeling of betrayal. Elodie lowered her head, tears slipping down her face. "I never meant to hurt you, Roscoe. I was just too focused on work and neglected our relationship." One counseling session helped us slowly open up and get to know each other again. I began to understand the importance of Elodie's work, and she realized what family meant to me. One weekend, we decided to go for a walk on the beach. The sun was gently spilling on the sand, and the waves were gently lapping at the shore. "Remember when we first met?" Elodie asked suddenly. I smiled and nodded. "On the cruise. You said I was blocking your sunlight." "That's when," she took my hand. "I knew you were special." We strolled along the beach, talking about the past and the future. In the sunlight, I saw a glint in Elodie's eye, a familiar one, full of passion and courage. "You know," I stopped and turned to face her. "Despite everything I've been through, I'm grateful to fate for letting me meet you." Tears welled up in Elodie's eyes. "Would you have chosen to be with me even if you knew you would go through this?" Instead of answering immediately, I gazed into her eyes. At that moment, all doubts and uneasiness seemed to dissipate. "It will," I said firmly, "because you're worth it. We're worth it." Elodie jumped into my arms, and we held each other tightly. The sea breeze brushed against us, taking away the last vestiges of separation. I knew that our love had been tested and made stronger. On the way home, we held hands as if we were returning to the time when we first met. We both understood that there was still a long road ahead of us and that we might encounter more challenges. But this time, we will face them together. Because we finally understand that true love is not fairy tale perfection, but the courage to choose each other even after the storm. Time flies, and 2 years have passed in a blink of an eye. Life always sneaks up on you when you least expect it. Today is the launch day of our new program. I stood in the conference room and looked at the Coalition Against Human Trafficking logo on the wall with a sense of pride. This program is the brainchild of Elodie and I. It's a way for us to turn our painful experiences into positive energy. Ladies and gentlemen, I cleared my throat and began my speech. We are gathered here today not just for a business project. We are here to change lives and save lives. My eyes swept over everyone in the room, and there was a determined gleam in their eyes. These are police officers, social workers, counselors, and investigative journalists like Elodie. Each of us came here with our own stories and missions. After the presentation, Elodie came up to me and gave me a hug. "You were awesome," she whispered in my ear. "I'm so proud of you." I took her hand and felt the wedding ring on her ring finger. "This is our achievement together," I said. "I couldn't have gotten this far without you." After work, we went to the community center together. There is a program here that we fund for victims of human trafficking and their families. I felt a deep sense of fulfillment looking at the people who had regained their lives. Roscoe Elodie came a familiar voice. It was Emma, Marcus' ex-fiancée. After the initial shock, she decided to devote herself to helping other victims. "Hey, Emma," I greeted with a smile. "How was support group today?" Emma had a twinkle in her eye. "It's great. We have a new member, and her story is really inspiring. By the way, I have great news for you guys." Elodie and I exchanged a puzzled look. Emma continued. "Remember that international NGO program I applied to earlier? I got accepted. I'm going to work in Africa next month." "Gosh, Emma, this is great." Elodie hugged her excitedly. "We're going to miss you." Looking at the smile on Emma's face, I couldn't help but marvel at the magic of fate. What was once a painful experience has now become an opportunity for her to find her way in life. When we got home at night, Elodie and I sat on the swing set in the backyard and looked up at the star-filled sky. "Roscoe," Elodie snapped, "I was thinking, maybe we could consider adopting a child." I looked at her with some surprise. "Are you serious?" She nodded, an expectant gleam in her eye. At the community center, I saw so many children who needed families. We have the power to give them a home, don't we? I was silent for a moment, then smiled and said, "You know what? I was thinking the same thing." Elodie leaned on my shoulder, and we smiled at each other. The traumas and misunderstandings we had had are now valuable experiences in our lives, making us appreciate each other more and have more courage to help others. The next day was the weekend, and we decided to return to the cruise ship that changed our destiny. Standing on the deck, looking out over the sparkling sea, was a world away. "Remember when we first met here, and you said I was blocking your sunlight?" I teased. Elodie smiled and shook her head. "Now I realize that you are the sunshine of my life." We stood embracing each other, letting the sea breeze blow. The past flashed back in our minds. The fluttering of our first meeting, the sweetness of our marriage, the pain caused by misunderstanding, the shock when the truth came out, and the hard work of rebuilding trust. Every step of the way, we have grown and made our love more indestructible. As the sun was setting, the golden sunlight poured over the sea, as if it was a perfect ending to our story. But I know that this is not the end, but a new beginning. Our love story may not be the most thrilling, but it has taught us the most precious things: trust, forgiveness, growth, and the courage to never give up. Whatever else awaits us in the future, we'll be there hand in hand. Because we know that true love is not the absence of storms, but the ability to still look at each other and smile after a storm. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, please feel free to contact me. Take care.